welcome to another episode of Rick's Garage. I'm of course your host, Rick the Welder, and on today's episode, Phase 1 is coming to a close as it's time to remove the factory clutch and flywheel and replace them with the new spec Stage 2 Plus and the proprietary steel flywheel. Once complete, this will bridge Phase 1 and 2 together, and although the clutch isn't exactly suspension related, it's a very necessary upgrade for the power adders that are going to be coming in Phase 2. It's also much easier to do the clutch now because the transmission has become more accessible with some of the other work that I've done in Phase 1. So let's get started on pulling that transmission out. Okay, first things first, in order to get to the transmission bell housing, we're going to need to clear some of these things out. And step number 1 is going to be disconnecting the battery because everything that we're working on is electronically controlled, so we got to make sure that there's not going to be any shorts. So first thing to go is going to be the battery. We're also going to need to get rid of the intake box, and I think for good measure, just to give us a little bit more space, I'm going to get rid of this charge piping as well. Okay, now that we've got some elbow room, next thing to do is we've got to take off all the additional bracketry and wiring harnesses that are attached to the transmission in order to split it from the engine. Okay, and what I mean by all the additional stuff, we've got stuff like the slave cylinder, all the pigtail harnesses, all of these things, the grounds, everything's got to get disconnected from the transmission in order so that nothing gets hung up. On the back side of the transmission, we've also got the shifter cables here, just got some clips holding them in, and then the associated brackets got to come off as well. The first thing that needs to come off underneath the car is Honda's this little Undertray plastic bit here. This plastic piece is attached to the car with a multitude of clips and bolts. The clips themselves are pretty straightforward. All you're going to need is a flathead screwdriver and just very gently pop the center section out of that clip. And as soon as it does, kind of give it a little wiggle and it pops out. This is what it looks like. Be very careful. They are extremely easy to break. Once this is taken off, let's take a quick look at it and see how many clips and bolts and where they go. Alright, so the fasteners that are holding the underpan to the car are the push clips that you just saw, some 10mm bolts, and lastly some 5mm Allen bolts. Okay, so next step, now that the underpan's been unbolted and removed, is to drain the transmission. So if you take a look, the drain plug is located on the rear of the transmission, and it's just any old 3/8 inch drive extension will fit in there. Loosen it, drain it, and just make sure before you fill it back up, put that drain plug back in and get yourself a new crush washer. A little gasket that goes in between, make sure you got no leaks in the future. Hey guys, wanted to take a quick break from what we were doing for a behind the scenes moment. So it's super easy to say, oh, well, we have to remove this and this and this, and bing, it's magically gone. But the reality is it's a fair bit of work. And what we've got right here is DIY at its finest. When you're not being paid by the hour to put it all back together, you want to try to take the fewest amount of things off as possible. And I find kind of dissecting the vehicle gives you a really good appreciation for the design and how it was built. The other thing I find myself appreciating is the fact that since it's a new car, everything under here is still clean, which is a first for me with all of my projects. Anyway, that was it. Back to what we were doing. Alright, now that the transmission is drained, it's time to get rid of these drive shafts. So first thing to do is remove the nut that's holding on the drive shaft to the hub, which is a giant 36mm socket. This will probably be one of those single-use purchases. After the nut's been removed, then I'm going to go back and remove the 17mm bolt holding the strut into the top of the spindle, as well as the 3 17mm nuts underneath, so I'm going to split the lower ball joint. I'm actually going to remove the entire hub, which will separate it from the drive shaft, and then it's just a matter of plucking it out of the transmission. Clutch,
yeah, I squeeze 3 at your cherry M3, bang every MC easily.
Take that.
Recently, niggas frontin' ain't saying nothing, so I just speak my peace, keep my peace. Cubans with the Jesus peace.
One side note is that the passenger side drive shaft has this carrier bearing that's bolted onto the side of the block, so you're going to have to crawl underneath, undo the 3 14mm bolts before the drive shaft will pop out of the transmission. Alright, next big chunk of work to remove the transmission is to drop the front subframe. Luckily, if you're a subscriber, you've already seen how to do this in episode 11. If not, here's a link to episode 11 as well as an invite to hit that subscribe button for instant notifications every time a new video is available. Okay guys, final steps. Just gonna get ready to break the bell housing loose. What I've done is made a little jig underneath the transmission to hold it steady. I've loosened off the transmission mount. That's gonna have to come off. Once the bell housing's split, the idea is to pull the transmission away to clear the pressure plate, then drop it down to expose the pressure plate and clutch underneath. So bell housing bolt.
Let's count them off. 1 comes in from the engine side, 2's underneath the thermostat, 3 also comes in from the engine side, 4 is there behind the clutch fork, underneath we've got 5 and 6 by the inspection plate, 7 on the side here, and finally number 8 is one of the starter bolts. As I mentioned, I slapped together a little 2x4 cradle just so that the transmission hopefully won't roll, as when it comes uncoupled, then we can pull it back and then lower it on the floor jack. Alright guys, fingers crossed, here goes nothing.
Can't you see? Sometimes your words just hypnotize me, and I just love your flashy ways. Guess that's why they're broken, you're so mean.
Yeah, baby, yeah!
Alright, that's where we're going to leave it off for today, guys. Stay tuned for the next episode as we tackle the side-by-side comparison and take a look at the install of that new clutch and flywheel. And as I mentioned earlier, make sure to hit that subscribe button for instant notifications as soon as part 2 is available. And as always, thanks very much for watching.